Today, I'm going to tell you a scary story about fishing. I've heard people say fishing is addictive, but I didn't believe it until I heard my buddy's story. My buddy was my high school classmate. We were really close. We sat at the same desk, shared a dorm room, but after graduation, we went to different colleges. Then we both got busy with our jobs, and we hardly ever talked. Until I went back home, we started hanging out more often. We chilled together and have coffee and have tea, just shooting the breeze. Mostly I talked, and he just sipped his coffee. We usually met at his office. He made a small fortune a few years back and bought a 2-story house. He'd fixed it up nice. He just relaxed there drinking coffee. Maybe it was the coffee, or maybe it was something else. But after that small fortune, there was no more action. His business was just so-so. Life became pretty ordinary. Once life gets boring, you fall into monotony. At first, he was hooked on nightclubs, but his wife was strict. Staying up late and drinking is bad for you. Then he got into hookers, but that's not something you can do all the time. He wanted to find another hobby. One thing led to another, and he started fishing with a few of his colleagues. Fishing is a thing that, it's hard to get into, but once you do, you're hooked. It's like a roller coaster reaching its peak. The thrill never ends. At first, it wasn't that bad. He just fished with his friends nearby. The Grand Canal, the Little Canal, Six Roads River, Sandy Lake, whatever. But these places were crowded and noisy, and they were pretty ordinary, so he wasn't really into them. An old guy who drove a Land Cruiser noticed my friend's attitude. He started taking him all over to fish. Some unknown ditch, or a pond in some village, or a little pool in the middle of nowhere. And that's how my buddy found his joy. He started looking for places to fish. Fishing in the wild is something else. Once he got into it, my buddy was all about wild fishing gear and a tea set. He'd just sit there, watching his rod. Then he'd chat with the old guy. He could actually spend a whole night like that. When they were together, they had some interesting experiences. Too many to count. They'd catch a toad or a turtle on the hook. No big deal. One time they caught a real tough one. They wrestled with this old dude all night. Finally, both of them got involved. They literally dragged the old guy into the water, dragged him to the middle. Then they realized it was a person. Another time, he just put his hook in the water and had to pee. He turned around and peed into the woods. He hadn't finished peeing yet when he saw at the edge of the woods a bunch of little mounds scattered about. Some had tombstones and some didn't. He saw this all the time. He was used to it. But as soon as he finished peeing, he heard rustling in the woods, like a big snake moving fast. By the sound of it, it sounded like a big snake moving fast. First it went from left to right, and then right to left. It seemed like it was after prey, but it just ran around a couple of times, and then it was gone. He heard that sound and almost peed his pants. But he thought about it. If he really encountered a snake, he couldn't do anything about it. But it didn't sound like one. Could it be a wild boar? But wild boars aren't that long. It rushed by once. And then again, he took out his phone to shine a light. Damn, he saw two glowing green eyes in the woods. They were blinking. He didn't know what it was. The eyes moved as he was standing there, stunned. It was a wolf dog on a chain, running wild in the woods, chasing something. The wolf dog was startled when it saw someone shining a light on it. It howled and ran away. It was a false alarm. My friend just laughed. Who the hell doesn't leash their dog and then it's so scared? These were some of the funnier things, but there were some scary things too. One time they went to a secluded ditch. They put out their lines and waited until almost midnight. Not a single fish. Just when they were about to pack up, the bobber moved. He pulled hard and brought up something dark. They took a closer look and it was a rag doll. It was tied with a bunch of cloth strips. There were words written on the cloth strips. They both saw it and exchanged a nervous glance. I just laughed when I heard this story because these events weren't even that bad compared to what I know. But one summer, he and the old guy went to a little pond and experienced something scary. It was a dilapidated pond in the middle of nowhere. The water was dark and covered in duckweed. No one around, just reeds and wild trees. But that kind of environment is the best for anglers. Quiet and peaceful. No distractions. They prepared bait. Then they drank and waited. As it got dark, they started fishing. They hadn't been fishing for a few minutes. When they caught a few fish, they were so happy they didn't even want to pee. You know, turning around to pee and lighting a cigarette are big no-nos. Everyone knows that. They fished for a while. Then they noticed someone else across from them. They were wearing white clothes, sitting calmly by the water. It was already dark. They could tell the person was wearing white, but they couldn't really make out their face. But no matter how you looked at it, the person seemed like a pro. They'd cast their line several times. My buddy's group stopped fishing completely. They hadn't taken a bite since the other person showed up. They were like idiots, staring at the guy. My buddy and the old guy just looked at each other. They thought the whole thing was weird. They couldn't stand being embarrassed. This wasn't working. They were talking about it when they saw the person across from them cast their line again. They pulled hard, but nothing came up. They just held on to the rod and struggled. For a while, they slowly reeled the line in. There was something big and white in the water, slowly rising. The old guy said to my buddy, "Whoa, that's a big one. Let's go take a look." My buddy was staring at the white thing in the water. No matter how he looked at it, something felt wrong. He told the old guy what he was thinking. He said, "Let's watch it for a while and then go over." The old guy thought something was wrong too. He said, "If that's a fish, why isn't it making any noise?" He said, "If it's not a fish." The guy just put it next to them. It's a big white fish. They could see it. They waited for a while. They were getting impatient. Finally, the old guy jumped up. My buddy couldn't hold back either. They put their rods down and walked around the pond. When they got closer, they offered him a cigarette and said hello. The person was pretty polite. After they lit the cigarette and chatted for a bit, my buddy knew this guy was a fellow night fishing enthusiast. But like him and the old guy, he didn't like crowds. He'd just carry his gear around and look for a little pond to spend the night at. After a few simple words, and they got to know each other, my buddy asked a curious question. "Dude, we saw you reel in a big one. Can we take a look?" The guy was startled. He took out his flashlight and shone it into the water. As soon as he shone the light, it almost scared the crap out of my buddy and the old guy. That white thing in the water wasn't a big fish. It was clearly a dead body. It was all white from being in the water. Its belly was swollen, floating on the surface. They couldn't really make out the face. The smell hit them, cold and stale. It was disgusting. The guy shone the light and said to them, "I knew it was a person from the start, but I didn't want to scare the fish. I thought I'd wait and call the police later." My buddy thought it made sense. He went back to his spot and fished for a while longer. Then he called the police with the old guy. The police came and checked it out. They said it was probably a kid from a nearby village. They called the village officials and the parents. It turned out to be true. After this experience, my buddy and the old guy admired the calm dude. They exchanged numbers and became friends. They'd go out together and find a pond to hang out at. The three of them had a great time. It was almost like they were brothers. This story might be a bit creepy, but it's not really scary. What's really scary is something he experienced when he was fishing alone. This happened last spring. My buddy felt like fishing, so he called the two guys, and they drove to a wild reservoir. They called it a wild reservoir because it was left over from an agricultural project. But the river changed course, and the reservoir wasn't that useful anymore. But because of its location, it became an artificial lake. Even though it's an artificial lake, it's been abandoned for a long time. It's not easy to find. The existence of this lake is a natural fishing paradise. It's scenic and secluded. No one bothers you. There's an old platform from the construction, which is perfect for fishing, and the lake is deep enough. There's plenty of space. They prepared bait. The next day, they waited for the sun to set. The three of them got close to the lake. They carried their bags and walked for another half hour. They got to their spot. They set everything up. They were ready to fish. But before they could start, the old guy saw a woman standing on the other side of the lake. There were often women who couldn't handle it anymore. They jumped into the river and killed themselves. The old guy had a sense of justice. He wondered if that woman was thinking about doing the same. He told my buddy and the strong guy about his idea. My buddy was kind of rough. He looked where the old guy was pointing, but he didn't see anything. The strong guy didn't say much. He looked over there. He didn't see anything either. The old guy said, "It was right there. Neither of you saw her." He finished the sentence and looked again. The woman was gone. The old guy said, "She was right there. Now she's gone." My buddy said, "Maybe she left." The strong guy said, "You were mistaken." Since it was a mistake, they just dropped it. They got busy. The three of them set up their chairs. They lit their cigarettes and poured themselves some water. They put out some bait. They put out their hooks. They were all set. They were just waiting for the fish to bite. I have to say, they chose a great spot. For the first 2 hours, they were busy. They kept catching grass carp and little carp, one after another. My buddy was so happy. He was just rambling on about how they were going to have a great time today. You know, when you say something, it usually ends up happening. He finished the sentence, and the three of them went quiet. They just sat there. There wasn't a sound on the water. Under the bright moon, the mountains were misty. The lake was calm and peaceful. The three of them were thinking, "It's too quiet." But the peace didn't last long. In the middle of the lake, there was a soft splash. A big fish jumped out of the water and then back in. Seeing this, the three of them got a little nervous. They were all talking about what kind of fish it was, how big it was. They were talking, but it was really just the old guy and my buddy. The strong guy didn't say anything. He said, "Don't get into the bait." They chatted for a while. The old guy's bobber went under. He had a bite. He got excited and grabbed the rod, but the rod slipped out of his hand into the water. The old guy was so worried he was about to jump in. Luckily, the strong guy was quick. He jumped up from his chair and grabbed the old guy. He didn't even care about his own bait. The old guy was anxious. He kept saying, "There's something in the water." The strong guy pointed at the surface. "Your rod is just floating there. What happened to the fish?" As soon as he said it, the old guy calmed down. He took a closer look. The rod was lying calmly on the water. Nothing was pulling on it. Nothing was pulling on it. He started to think something was wrong. He was trying to figure out how to get the rod back. It was a Mingling Diamond carbon fiber rod. It's not like he didn't care. It was a shame to lose it. Just as the old guy was about to reach it, the rod suddenly slipped forward. It went past him. He was worried. It was just a few feet away. He gritted his teeth and stepped into the water. He was about to grab it when the rod slipped again. It went another few feet. The old guy was really worried. He was going to chase after it. The strong guy pulled him back. The old guy was still going to go, but the strong guy took his flashlight and shone it on the surface. He said, "Look at what you see." The old guy stared intently. It was pitch black. He couldn't see anything. It looked like seaweed. It was swaying back and forth. The strong guy said, "That's hair." The old guy heard the strong guy's words and was startled. He stopped struggling. He got out of the water. He set up another rod. He sat down calmly and continued fishing. This time, when he sat down, the old guy was distracted. He kept staring at the spot on the water. It was getting late, but the moonlight was bright. He didn't need a flashlight. He could see the thing in the water pretty well. He watched for a while. The old guy seemed to be getting restless. He'd light a cigarette and then check his phone. My buddy thought he had something to do. He said, "If you have to go, go ahead." The old guy shook his head. He looked troubled. Just then, the strong guy got a call. He said, "You ate her. You ate her," and then said he had to go. "My father-in-law was hit by a car. He's in the hospital. I have to go." He packed up his things and left quickly. After the strong guy left, the old guy got more and more agitated. His foot kept shaking. He couldn't stop it. My buddy was curious and asked what was wrong. The old guy lit a cigarette and asked my buddy, "Did you hear anything?" "Hear what?" My buddy was a little scared by his question. The old guy said, "Listen carefully. Did you hear anyone yelling for help?" As soon as he said it, my buddy held his breath and listened carefully. He could actually hear a woman yelling for help, faintly, but the voice sounded like it was coming from far away, and it sounded like there was water splashing. Glug, glug, glug. He heard that sound, and my buddy got worried too. He was worried that someone might have fallen into the water. If they didn't help them, it would be a sin. Thinking about it, he talked to the old guy about it. He took his flashlight and followed the lake's edge to look. At first, they went right along the lake. But the further they went, the closer they got to the highway. They couldn't hear the voice clearly, so they went left along the lake. There was a small mountain to their left. It was tall and dense with trees, but because of the season, the only sounds in the forest were the cicadas, and the water on this side of the lake was different. This side was covered with reeds. The wind blew through them, rustling. It sounded spooky, but as they walked along the left side of the lake, the woman's cries for help became clearer, but they didn't understand. Why was the woman still yelling for help after all this time? My buddy walked for a long time. He looked at the dark forest by the lake. He got creeped out, and in the tall reeds, he felt something watching him. He felt chills down his spine. Something felt off. He said to the old guy, "Something's not right. Let's go back." The old guy was obsessed with going on. "You go back." "I'm not going." Seeing how determined the old guy was, my buddy felt bad. He was also afraid something bad might happen to the old guy alone. He decided to go with him. After they passed the reeds, there was a large concrete slope. It slanted down into the water. Just when they got to the concrete slope, they saw a woman standing in the water. Not far away, she was yelling for help. She said her daughter had fallen in and asked my buddy and the old guy for help. My buddy loved to fish, but he couldn't swim. There was no way he was going in. The old guy didn't care about any of that. He heard the woman's cry and didn't hesitate for a second. He jumped right in. After the old guy jumped in, my buddy suddenly felt something was wrong. He saw that the woman wasn't standing in the water. She was floating on the surface, and there weren't any ripples around her. Seeing this, my buddy was terrified. He pulled the old guy out of the water, but the old guy was crazy. He had to go back in. He said there was someone in the water, and he had to save them. Eventually, the old guy got angry. Not only did he want to go in, but he wanted to drag my buddy in too. My buddy couldn't swim, but he was pretty strong. The old guy was fat, but it was just fat. For a moment, he couldn't do anything to my buddy. They were stuck in a standoff. Suddenly, the strong guy came running. He jumped in and helped my buddy pull the old guy out of the water. They got to the concrete slope. The old guy wasn't calm yet. He was still struggling. The strong guy didn't hesitate. He slapped him twice. 2 slaps later, the old guy finally calmed down. He shook his head, saw the strong guy standing next to him. He was startled and asked, "Why did you hit me?" The strong guy was about to hit him again. The old guy dodged. He was confused. "Why are you hitting people?" He finished the sentence and was startled again. He seemed to realize where he was. He asked again, "How did I get here?" The strong guy saw that he was okay. He didn't hit him. The old guy calmed down. The 3 of them realized something was wrong. They weren't going to fish anymore. They packed up their things and left. On the way out, my buddy asked the strong guy, "Didn't you say you were going to the hospital? How did you get back here?" The strong guy explained, "I got a call from my wife by the lake. She said my father-in-law was in the hospital, but in the car, I wanted to ask her what hospital. But when I called her, she mumbled and called me crazy. Then I asked her again and realized she hadn't called me at all. I realized it was some kind of prank. I rushed back here. When I got back to the fishing spot, the 2 of you were gone. I saw light from the concrete slope in the distance. That's how I saved the old guy." He asked the old guy what had happened, but the old guy said he didn't remember anything. The last thing he remembered was reeling in the rod. He remembered that he didn't get the rod. He didn't remember anything else. After that, the 3 of them never went back to that wild reservoir. But later, he heard from some other fishermen that 2 friends were fishing there, and all 3 drowned. The 2 drowned in the deep water. There's nothing strange about that. The strangest thing was the other guy. His body was still on shore. His clothes weren't even wet. It was like he just stuck his head in the water. He drowned himself like that. This year, the wild reservoir had another incident. 2 old guys went fishing there. One insisted that someone was in the water and had to be saved. He drowned. The other tried to save him, but he didn't make it to the edge. His phone rang. He took out his phone. It was his wife. She said, "Come home now. Something urgent happened." The old guy was torn. He didn't know what to do. Just then, his wife's voice was filled with sobs. She said their son was in a car accident. Then she said their grandson fell from a building. The old guy was worried. He didn't care about the guy in the water. He hopped on his scooter and left. When he got back, he found his family was fine. He was going to get mad, but his wife said, "I was sleeping soundly. Then I dreamt of a big fish in the water. It was black and stinky. It grabbed you and pulled you into the water. That's when I called you." The old guy realized. He heard about the legends of the reservoir later. He knew he'd been lucky that night. Besides those two incidents, the reservoir was closed off to visitors. But it couldn't stop people's enthusiasm for fishing. There were still incidents, but my buddy never went back. After this experience, they became best friends. They still went fishing everywhere. The most recent incident happened at a friend's abandoned pond. The pond was also on the side of a small mountain. It was long and narrow. Even though it was abandoned, the fish weren't cleaned out. You know, my buddy heard about this great opportunity. Why wouldn't he go? When they got there, they realized it was a treasure trove. Of course, they went at night. They just got there and sat down when they heard a woman singing Huang Mei opera. Yeah, the solo was beautiful and very pleasant to listen to. It was so quiet that day. The three of them heard it and knew something was wrong, but they didn't mind. The fish were biting. They didn't stop. Just then, the old guy put out his hook. Less than a minute later, he felt something heavy. He was thrilled. He pulled hard, but it wouldn't come up. He grabbed the rod and slowly reeled it in. But when it got to his hand, it was a black box. It had patterns on it. He was confused. How did this get here? He turned on his light, and it was a square, vermilion crown. The strong guy was calm. He said, "An urn." The old guy was scared and threw it back in the water. But as soon as he threw the urn in, the woman singing Huang Mei opera stopped. The three of them were blown away.